We're now again on Tzadivav Amid Beis, and we're up to Ben Teisha V'Yom Echad. So this particular young lad, who's 9 years old and a day, he decided to have bia with the Yevamot. And on a Doraisa level, that's not valid, because he has to be what's called a bar kinyan, and a 9-year-old is not capable of a kinyan. He doesn't have das.
That's some 9-year-old in any event.
Right. But das is just, again, Yechiel, only because I'm pressured with time on it, but I want to tell you, das is not what you and I think it is. And it's nothing to do with maturity. The Vilna Gaon knew Shas probably by the age of 6, but he's not a bar das until he's bar mitzvah. This is a halachic legal category. As a lawyer, you know that the law operates with legal categories. I don't have to tell you that. Now, in addition to the Yevamot, when he became a gadol, then he married another woman. And the Mishnah says that if he dies, then the Rishona, the first wife, is choletzes v'lo misyabemes, and the second wife is choletzes o misyabem. So the second wife that he married as a gadol falls for yibum. And the Gemara asks the following question: V'asu es bias ben teisha k'maimer b'gadol. We have a principle called Maimer. Maimer is Kiddushin D'Rabbanan in the case of Yibum. And after Maimer, the halacha is that not only is it true that the woman who received Maimer is Eino Misyabemes, there's no Yibum, but even Hatzara, the other woman that was married together with her to this husband who passed away, she also is excluded from Yibum. And tidachet sar miyubum. Here, in this case, in the Mishnah, it says explicitly that the shniya, the other woman who's the tzara, will fall for yibum. And the question now arises: what's the difference between maimar and a bias ben teisha? The Gemara is operating now with the premise that maimar and bias ben teisha are both equal, because in both cases we're dealing with a kinyan d'Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan, in the case of a Kinyan, the Rabbanan exclude not only the person, that woman, who received that Kinyan, but even Hatzara. So therefore, if we want to be consistent, in our case of Ben Teisha, the Tzara of the Balas Bias Ben Teisha should also be excluded from Yibum, and our Mishnah says she falls for Yibum. Omar Rav, Lo Asu Bias Ben Teisha K'maimar B'Gadol. The Chachamim, when they established and, shall we say, upgraded the status of Bias Ben Teisha on a D'Rabbanan level, they did not bring it all the way up to the level of Maimar B'Gadol. And the Nafkamina is going to be the Tzara. In a case of Maimar, where the Rabbanan see it as almost like a full-fledged Kinyan Ishus, therefore the Balas HaMaimar is excluded, and she drags with her and excludes also her Tzara, the second wife. But in the case of a Bias Ben Teisha, they didn't consider it like a full-fledged Ishus relationship, even the Rabbanon, and they put it down one notch below Maimar, and then Afkamina is that it doesn't generate a psul in the Tzara. And now the Gemara says that Shmuel has a different opinion. Shmuel Amar, Asu v'Asu. When the Chachamim decided to recognize the validity of Bias Ben Teisha, they upgraded it to the exact same status as Maimar B'Gadol. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Asu v'Asu. So we've got Rav on one side, and we've got Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan on the other side. And the Gemara is now going to claim that this is a machlokes tanoim. But first, the Gemara asks the following question on Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, V'Yasu. V'Yasu means, why don't you go all the way? If you're telling me that Bias Ben Teisha was upgraded according to the rabbinic law to the status of Maimar, then the Tzara should likewise be Asura. What's going on? Why is it that in the case of Maimar, the Tzara is Asura, but in the case of Bias Ben Teisha, the Tzara is Muteres? So the Gemara explains, Tanoi. This is a machlokas Tanoim. And I have to say a special Shira Malos or Mimamakim or something to get by the next few lines of Gemara in less than an hour, but I'll try. This machlokas Tanoim is a machlokas about the very essence of Maimar in the case of Yibum, in the case of Yevamot. the classic understanding of Maimar is what we would call a Gzeira Mishum Eshes Shnei Mesim. Okay, what does that mean? That means that in theory, in concept, a woman could fall for Yibum from two different deceased brothers. Each one is projecting her for a Zikas Yibum. Now, how could that be possible? The answer is through Maimar Begadol, because Maimar gives that Yavam who did the Maimar a quasi status of her husband. And that's the Rabbanan. On a Doraisa level, the husband is the first brother to die. So could you imagine the following scenario where Reuven dies and leaves Rachel for Yibum, Shimon does Maimar and dies, and now Rachel falls to Levi, the third brother. Which Zika is Levi going to fulfill in the context of the mitzvah of Yibum? Well, on a Doraisa level, there's no doubt that it's Reuven that is projecting the Zika. On the other hand, on a Rabbanan level, it is Shimon that projects the Zika. And now this woman, Rachel, is falling to Yibum from two different brothers. Again, all this is the Rabbanan. And that's the simple, classic understanding of Maimar Begadol. It's Eshes Shnei Mesim. However, there's a Mishnah in a perek which is called Dalid Achim. David, did you raise your hand? No. Okay.
I'm greeting George.
Okay. So there's a perek called Dalid Achim, and the Tana in Dalid Achim has another twist, a different understanding of the Gzeira of Maimar. It's not based on Eshes Shnei Mesim at all, but rather it's based on what's called a Gzeira Mishum Tzara, which means the following: that if Yibum were to take place with the Balas HaMaimar, the woman who received Maimar, then he's going to come to be Miyabem her Tzara as well. Because it looks like, to the onlooker, that these two women who are tsaros are being projected by two different brothers, and therefore he's going to think that he's going to be miyabim one of them and then be miyabim the other one. If he goes ahead and be miyabim the other one, that's a violation of a lavdol raisa, which is based on the pasuk Asher lo yivne, kevan shelo bana shuv lo yivne, which means that there's only going to be one yibum from one bias. There cannot be two maise yibum from the same bias.
The source from which brother, Reuven or Shimon?
Shimon, right? We're talking about Shimon. Reuven died. He left his wife Rachel, and now Shimon does a maimar, and Shimon has another wife.
Okay.
We're afraid that if we allow Shimon after maimar to Rachel, with his death, to Levi to be miyabim Rachel Eshes Shimon, then his other wife, that Shimon's other wife, we'll call her Rivka, the Yavam Levi will be miyabim both of them because he's confused. He sees that she's coming from two different brothers. But in truth, on a Doraisa level, she's only coming from one brother, meaning from Reuven. So there's only one household, and to violate the Isser of Lo Yivna would be a violation of Allah. So again, this is an hour's discussion. You have to have real Rahmanis on me. I'm squeezing an hour shear into 1 minute. I really should have insisted that we started Daf Tzadi Zayin, but that would have been a lot easier for me. But this is what we have, and this is what we have to do. Fine. Now, based on these two interpretations of why there's no Yibum to the Balas Maimar, We can interpret it in the following way. That Ashmeinon begadol v'hu adin bekatan. We're going to say the following. That our Mishnah, which says that there is Yibum to the Tzara of the Ben Katan, the Ben Tes, there will be Yibum, and we don't worry about the problem with the Tzara. So that Tana is of the opinion that the reason why we don't allow Maimar, we don't allow Yibum in the case of a Balas Maimar, has nothing to do with the Tzara, but rather it has to do with the principle called Nira Kishteem Mibayis, right? That what's it called? Get the language. Just 1 second, sorry. Just want to get the calculation correct here. Eshes Shnei Mason, sorry, it slipped my mind. So again, we'll just summarize. Why is it that the Rabbanon excluded Yibum in the case of a Balas Maimar, after Maimar? One is because of Eshes Shnei Mason, and the other is because of Gzeira Mishum Tzara. And that's a machlokas between our Mishnah here and a Mishnah in Perek Daled Achim. The Mishnah in Perek Daled Achim reflects the opinion that it was Gzeira Mishum Tzara. And therefore, according to that opinion, the halacha of Tzaras Balas HaMaimar should also spill in to this case of a Katan Ben Tes. So that's what the Gemara says, Ashmeinon begadol v'hu adin bekatan. V'hayde kamar gadol mishum de begadol kai. So that the only reason why the Mishnah in Perek Daled Achim, which is operating with the assumption that the underlying reason for the prohibition of Yibum and a Balas Maimar is because of the Tzara, that will apply even to a Katan Ben Tes, because again, we're going to Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, who hold that a Katan Ben Tes is equal to a Balas Maimar. No difference whatsoever. And therefore, according to that Mishnah in Perek Daled Achim, hu adin bekatan, the same din that applies to a gadol should apply to a katan. And the bias ben techa of a katan is equal to the maimer of a gadol. And that would exclude chalita from the tzara as well, exclude yibum from the tzara as well. There would only be an option of chalita. And the reason for that is because the entire zera of nirek ishtei batim is based on the tzara, that we're afraid that he might come to bimiyavim the tzara. But our Tana, who says that the second wife of the katan falls for yibum, svirale, that Tana is of the opinion that asu v'lo gazar mishum maimar. The reason why the tzara is mutter is because the gzera of maimar was not based on tzara. And the reason why they prohibited it has nothing to do with the tzara, but rather bishum eshes shnei mesim. As I explained before, I mean, again, we can go over it and over it again if we have time, but just get the idea of eshes shnei mesim. And the Rabbana made a gzera that the Baal Maimar, and for that matter, you could also classify the Bias Ben Tesha, it looks like eshes shnei mesim. And therefore, we have a gzera that excludes Yibum from the woman who had the Maimar or the woman who had the Bia Ben Techa. But that has no impact on the Tzara because the gzera was not because of the Tzara. The Ashme'ina B'Katan, for who had din B'Gadol. Okay, so we're telling you that the Katan Ben Techa, his second wife that he married after he became a gadol, the tzara, falls for yibum, and the same din would apply in a baimar situation. So why did our Mishnah limit itself to a ben teisha? And the answer is hi dekamak b'katan shum de b'katan kai. So the Mishnah over there in Perek Daled Achim is talking about maimar, and therefore it mentions maimar. And it tells you that in the case of maimar, the tzara is excluded as well from yibum because the entire Zera that prohibited and excluded Yibum in a Maimar situation is because of the Tzara. Why does the Mishnah not mention Ben Tes? Because the subject of the Mishnah is Maimar. Our Mishnah, the subject of which is Ben Tesha, is going to tell you that a Ben Tesha, when he has Bia with the Yevamot, there's no possibility of Yibum with her. And Enochinami, when the Mishnah here says that the tzara will fall for Yibum, the same thing would apply in the case of Maimar, that the second wife of the Balas HaMaimar, the tzara, would actually fall for Yibum. You'll ask me, so why didn't our Mishnah mention Maimar? Why did it focus its attention on Katan? The answer is because the subject of our Mishnah is Katan. Okay. Bench Gomil if we got by that. All right. Now let's go on here to the bottom of Daf Tzadivav Amid Beis. The Gemara tells us the following story. This is like an agadic kind of interlude. Azal Rabbi Lazar v'Yamal Shmaita Bei Midrash. Rabbi Lazar was a Talmud Muvak of Rabbi Yochanan, and he got up in front of the Beis Medrash and he issued the ruling that the Bia of a Ben Tes has the same status as the Maimar of a Gadol. But he did not say it in the name of his Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan. Ikpid. Rabbi Yochanan got very upset about this. Uligabe Rabbi Ami Varvasi, two great students of Rabbi Yochanan, great Amoraim, came to Rabbi Yochanan to try to get him to pacify him and calm him down. Amrule, they said to Rabbi Yochanan, but this is not going to be a great success. Lo kach hoya hamaisa bebeis hakneses shel Tveria. What about the story that took place in the synagogue in Tveria? There was a controversy amongst the Tanoim, be neger. Okay, in the old days when you had a door, the way that you locked or opened the door was through something called a neger. A neger was a kind of a metal rod that was suspended from the top, from the mashkov, and you would tie it down to the ground. That's how you lock the door. And we're dealing with an issue of muktzah. And the question is, are you allowed to use that neger on Shabbos to lock the door? Now, the neger is called mechuber lekarka. Mechuber lekarka is muktzah. However, this was an exceptional case, at least according to Rabbi Yossi. Yesh berosho glustera. A glustera, if I can give you a contemporary example, would be like a billiard ball, right? A little round ball. So the ball was attached to the neger, and it was meant to hold down the neger. So it would suspend it in air, and you just pulled it down when you wanted to lock the door. Nechleku bo Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi holds that there's no muktzah in this case. Normally, a neger would be muktzah because it's mechuber lekaka. Here, because it's attached to the glustera, and the glustera is called a kli because it could function in many different ways. Therefore, it's excluded from muktzah. And since the glustera is attached to the neger is not muktzah. Rabbi Lezer was of the opinion, no. We're going to look at the glustera. We're not going to call it a kli. The glustera is not functioning as a kli, not at this moment anyway. It's functioning as part of the neger, and therefore it's also mechuber lekarka, and therefore it's muktzah. And this became a fierce debate. You and I don't know from debates like this. We think this is all about marital disharmony. When the husband yells at the wife and she yells at him, and then they start throwing things at each other. You know what I mean? Yechiel, we've probably heard about such stories, right? Not in your family, Baruch Hashem, but in your clients' families. And these two Tanaim were at each other's throats over the issue of muktzah of a neger attached to a glustera. You see how Torah was so important to them. Achemitoch Meriva, I'm going to add a word here, Karu Sefer Torah b'chamosam. They ripped the Sefer Torah apart. So the Gemara asks, Karu Salkadaita, come on, you can't tell me that they ripped the Sefer Torah. Ela ema shenikra Sefer Torah b'chamosam. They got so angry that inadvertently they ripped open a Sefer Torah. But you see what anger can do to a person. Anger is the worst thing. So in this sense, the Amoraim, Talmidim of Rabbi Yochanan, was sort of implying in a diplomatic way that calm down. Yesham Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, Omar Tmeani im lo yeh beis hakneses zu la'avodah zara v'kachav. And Rabbi Yossi already predicted that this synagogue would be turned into a monastery for idolatry if they ripped the Sefer Torah out of anger. Hadar ikbidfei. And Rabbi Yochanan got even more angry at his Talmud, Rabbi Elazar, for not mentioning the halacha in his name. Omar, Chavrusa Nami. Are we like a Chavrusa? You're telling me a story about two Tanaim that are on the same level, and their anger was not justified. But here I'm talking about not a Chavrusa. I'm talking about a Talmud of mine. What a chutzpah. A Talmud of mine doesn't mention the halacha in my name? So now they have to call in the big guns. Ul ligabe Rabbi Yaakov ben Idi. They called the famous Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi in order to be Mafayes Rabbi Yochanan. Amalei, Rabbi Yaakov tells him a whole different methodology, a whole different approach. The pasuk testifies, and this is a pasuk in Sefer Yoshua. Kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe avdo, kein tziva Moshe es Yoshua, v'chein asa Yoshua, lo heisir davar mikol shetziva Hashem es Moshe. The pasuk testifies that everything that Yoshua did, he heard it from the mouth of Moshe, exactly as he was commanded. He did not deviate one iota. And now Rabbi Yaakov asks the question, V'chi al kol davar omer Yoshua, haya omer lehem kach omer li Moshe? Who are you fooling? Every time that Yeshua did something, he said, well, this is what I heard from Moshe. Eli Yoshua Yoshe v'dorech stam. Yoshua would teach the Torah. V'kol yodim, and everyone knew shetoraso shel Moshe, whatever Yoshua said, he heard it from Moshe Rabbeinu. There was no need for Yoshua to quote his Rebbe. Af Rabbi Elazar Talmidcha, your student Rabbi Elazar, Yoshe v'dorech stam. He doesn't mention your name. Hakol yodim imi shalchai. Everybody knows that it's yours. Amalahem. And at that point, Rabbi Yochanan turns to Rav Ami and Rav Asi, and he says to them, "Neimatem yodim, iatem yodim lefayes, kemo ben idi chavereinu." How come you don't know the right way of saying the right words to calm down someone from his anger? Why was he so mocked? What is this all about? Honor and covenant and glory? The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, saying a halach in the name of someone is very critical. What does it mean? When it says in the Pasuk of it says, Agura ba'alecha olamim, I will live in two worlds. How can a person live in this world and in the next world at the same time? Hello. Okay, now we have to start the daf. And